Hi folks, and welcome to Tech Talk. My name is Anu. My guest today is Heidi Roizen. Come join me. Hello Heidi, and thanks so much for coming on the show. It's great to have you here.
It is great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. You are a successful investor, an entrepreneur, a corporate executive. You've worked in Silicon Valley for over 3 decades. You are co-founder of a software company called Maker. You were CEO of that company for over a decade until it got acquired by Deluxe Corporation. After that, you went on to serve as a VP of Worldwide Developer Relations at Apple, and then you went into venture capital. Today, you are partner at Threshold Ventures, and you've studied at Stanford. You have your undergraduate degree and MBA from Stanford, and you're also lecturing at Stanford in the School of Engineering. And Harvard Business School has done a case study on you, which is fascinating. Lots to talk about.
Oh my.
I'd like to start at your beginnings. You were born and raised in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
Tell me about your childhood and your family environment.
I was really lucky to have been born here, and it was really in a way by design. Both my parents are immigrants. I'm a firstborn American. And my father was from Romania by way of Russia. My mother was German. And they both came here for the proverbial better life and better opportunity. And I remember when I was a little kid, my dad would say to me, Heidi, I've traveled the whole world to plant the family here, so you don't have to look any farther than this. This is the best place in the world to live. And so I always feel very fortunate that that was the case, because this is such an amazing place, and was even back in the 60s when I was growing up. My dad was a very entrepreneurial type, and he also was a sort of a self-trained technologist. So he worked at Ampex Corporation in the early years in the 50s, which was really one of the early pioneers in technology innovation here in Silicon Valley. In fact, I was very sad when, for any local Silicon Valley people, there was that sign, the Ampex neon sign on 101 that they recently dismantled and took away. And for all my life, driving by that, it was always an indication of sort of the history of the valley in a very personal way for me.
Yeah. So you grew up here, and what was it like? What was it like going to school here, and just where did you go to school? Where did you grow up?
So I did move around a lot. My parents got divorced, and my dad also, as an entrepreneur, went through some very difficult financial times. So it was not the glorious rags to riches story. It was sort of the rags to pretty good to rags again to pretty good to. So in a funny way, I grew up all over. I went to school in Portola Valley. I went to school in Palo Alto. I went to high school in San Jose. Lived up at Lake Tahoe for a couple of years. It was an early life where I moved around quite a bit. And after my parents got divorced, my mother only had an 8th grade education, and so she really only had the opportunity to have minimum wage jobs. And she really struggled, and we struggled as a result. And one of the things that was important to me as I thought about what was I going to do in my life was to make sure that I got a proper education so that I wouldn't be in the situation of that she was in.
Of course. So then you ended up at Stanford University. You got your undergraduate degree there. You majored in English. I'm curious, was there an interest in technology at that time, or did that sort of develop later? I mean, how did you end up in technology?
Right. It is a circuitous career path, to say the least. And sometimes I look back and I think, what was I thinking that I thought an English degree was the right career path? I mean, obviously, I actually think an English degree is very valuable, because communication is one of the most important things we do as humans. It's one of the most important things we do in business. And so having that grounding in both literature and creative writing, which was actually the degree that I earned, was very important and has served me very well. I think at the time I wanted to be a journalist and a writer. And interestingly, I got my degree, and then I was here in Silicon Valley, and you'd open up the newspaper at the time, and there weren't a whole lot of job postings that said English major wanted. So interestingly, I had worked at the Stanford Daily my entire undergraduate life as the production manager. And so there were a couple of jobs for people in tech companies to come in and do communications, internal communications. So I actually was hired by Tandem Computers, one of the early burgeoning, I think it was one of the first companies to have beer busts on Fridays and things like that.
Yeah.
And I was hired there prior to their IPO to run the internal communications. It was like a monthly newsletter. And I also taught entry computing classes to the for example, like the administrative teams that would come on board, how to use email, how to use a word processor, how to use those things, which were very new at the time. We're talking 1980. And so I ended up in tech because that was what one did, because I was here in Silicon Valley. It's like a company town. A lot of things were tech. I ended up in tech. When I got there, I loved Tandem. It was a wonderful place. Jimmy Trybig was really one of the seminal leaders of that generation in terms of being a very progressive CEO. But what I realized is everybody who was getting ahead either had an MBA or an engineering degree. I figured it was a little late to go back and be an engineer, but that MBA thing looked interesting. So I went back to business school. And it was really there that I had this amazing opportunity, which was I have a brilliant brother, Peter, my older brother, and he is a brilliant programmer. And he had written this very interesting program. He was working at the World Health, he had worked at the World Health Organization, then he went to the World Bank. And at the World Bank, he was constantly being asked to write these programs to analyze data. And he thought, well, I'm constantly writing programs that are very similar to the programs I've written in the past. And if I could just separate the data from the program, from the equations, then I wouldn't have to rewrite that part over and over again. So really, again, it's hard to think back to those days. He started writing this in probably 1978, but it really was what became the spreadsheet industry. He wrote an early spreadsheet product. And he approached me about running this company together. And so that's what we did. And so I had this amazing opportunity to do something from the ground up with my brother. And for me, the spark, I remember the first time I wrote a document on a word processor, which was right around that time, right around late 70, early 80. And it was a magical experience because after being an undergrad in creative writing and using whiteout, which is still, most people don't even know what whiteout is anymore. This idea that you could put something down and you could move it around and you could work with it and you could allow this creative energy to come back into it and the editing function, it was magical for me. And so to me, the idea of the personal computer was not a technical thing. It was not because I was a technical person. I viewed it as a tool. Just like you don't have to know how to build a car in order to get great value driving a car. And so I viewed the personal computer in the same way. And that was what was such a passion for me, was to bring that computing power, whether it's word processing, spreadsheet, but your basics of things people do, to the non-technical person.
Very interesting. And so so then you did Teammaker, and then you took on a high-level position at Apple as VP of Worldwide Developer Relations. And during that time, you were there. Your role was to reconcile a lot of relations that Apple needed help with, and you were the person that was very instrumental in doing that. Can you tell me a little bit about this role at Apple?
Sure. And that was, that came after, my brother and I, we incorporated the company in 83 and we sold it in 94, and I left and joined Apple in 96. So there was a big span there. During that time, I had become very involved in the software industry. There was a group called the Software Publishers Association. I became very involved in that and ultimately became the president of that organization, trade association. So I had a profile probably higher than the profile of our firm. And that's why Apple recruited me. They said, well, the developer community is very important. and we need someone to run that. Obviously there was already an organization there, but they felt that I could come in with a fresh outsider perspective, but really, in essence, the voice of the customer. And for me, it was a really exciting opportunity, sort of a Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington. For all those years, my firm had sort of lived or died by the decisions that Apple made. We were a very early Mac developer. I was a critic of Apple in the true sense of the word, both positive and negative. And so it was a wonderful opportunity for me to go in and try to do things from the inside. 96 was a very difficult year for Apple. I mean, in the short time I was there, I think I was only there for 13 months. There were, 2 and about to be 3 different CEOs. The company had almost declared bankruptcy. It was known as the beleaguered Apple computer. It's fascinating to me and amazing to see that now it is, often the most valued company on earth. That in those days, even though it had amazing products, it had really stumbled as a company. And so the job really was to build a platform that developers could run businesses on. It wasn't really about shoving technology down developers' throats. It was about convincing them that the Macintosh platform, which was the only platform Apple had at the time, was a place that they could build innovative software products and make money, right? And so that was very near and dear to my heart as a former Mac software company, Mac developer. We also did PC software, but Mac was the bulk of really what we had done as a company.
I see. After Apple, you went into venture capital. Mm-hmm. What was your path into venture capital?
It was an interesting path. What happened is there was a little snippet in between. So I left Apple. I just didn't feel that the corporate world was for me. It was at a very tumultuous time for the company. My children were 1 and 3 at the time. I was never seeing them because the role required a lot of travel, and I just decided, no, I need to take a break. And so I left Apple, and I immediately, someone I had known through my work at Apple, a guy named Doug Burgum, he was the CEO of a company called Great Plains Software, he called me and he said, great, now you're not conflicted anymore. We really would like to bring you on our board of directors. We're going to go public this year. Would you come and serve on the board? So I joined his board, Great Plains Software, and I decided that maybe it was a good time in my life to do a sort of a portfolio career and work with all the way from startups to public or near public companies. And I would trade basically my sweat equity for equity. And so I called it mentor capitalism, not venture capitalism, but mentor capitalism. I stole that from another guy, Stan Marisman. I always say, whenever I use that expression, I'll credit you, Stan. So Stan, crediting you. Anyway, I became a mentor capitalist, and I spent 97, 98, 99, the beginning of 99, working with a number of companies. Probably the best known is Great Plains, but there was another one in the early ebook reader called Softbook. There were B, the early operating system. There were some interesting companies in there. So I built a reputation as a person who could help startups and serve on boards. And then I got called by someone starting a software-focused venture capital entity. That was actually SoftBank Venture Capital originally, and then became Mobius Venture Capital. SoftBank was the largest single LP in the fund. So it started as SoftBank and then morphed to Mobius. And so I joined them in 99 as a partner there, which is either the best or the worst timing to become a venture capitalist, depending on your framework or your perspective. For the first 6 months, everything I did made money and had 10x valuations and things went public. Literally, it was that way. It felt that way. And I thought, this venture stuff is really easy. Yeah. And then 2000 happened. And then it was years of sorting things out and trying to find homes for companies and going through a really difficult period before we came back out again. So first I was with Mobius. I was there for, I think it was 7 years until we decided as a group, we said, the boom and bust has happened and the world doesn't need another new venture firm in Silicon Valley. So actually the core team of Mobius that wanted to continue on became Foundry. Brad Feld, Jason Mendelsohn, Ryan McIntyre, Seth Levine, a great, fantastic venture firm based in Boulder, Colorado. So they went on to do that. And I decided to just take a break and took a break. And then I got called by Tim Draper at DFJ. And he said, hey, we could really use somebody like you around here. So I ultimately joined there. And then this last year, the venture team of DFJ spun out and became Threshold Ventures. So
I see.
there's the whole journey.
There's the whole journey. Fantastic. So my next question to you is, do you believe women in venture capital face similar challenges as women entrepreneurs?
I probably have a hard time answering this because I've been doing this a very long time. And so I think part of that is you gain experience, you gain stature in the industry, and you probably gain a little bit of an attitude that, you are who you are and you're going to do what you do. And so I feel sometimes the benefit of age comes with a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of perspective that I just don't take some of this stuff as seriously anymore. And I'm fine with it. I'm fine with who I am. And so it doesn't affect me as much as perhaps it used to. Perhaps it did when I first joined. But I think that in many ways, we have made a lot of progress. In many ways, to be a woman entrepreneur, of which we have many in the Threshold portfolio, to be a woman venture capitalist, I don't feel like I lose deals because I'm a woman venture capitalist, right? I really don't feel that way. Now that said, I think it would be foolish to say there's no more bias and everything's awesome and you see it all the time. And I think one of the things that's the most insidious about bias today and about the limiting of opportunity that bias cause is it can be very subtle. Yeah. It can be almost masked in a way that 20, 30 years ago, it was very blatant. Literally, if you ask entrepreneurial women of my generation, they would have literally faced situations like I did where a venture capitalist said to me, well, aren't you going to just have babies and quit your job? Now I don't think anyone today we all understand that those are not the kinds of things you say anymore. But if you're still thinking it and you pass on the deal for some other reason you come up with because you sort of don't feel comfortable having a woman CEO because she might have a child, well then, the net result is the same. That person didn't get funding. So I do think that we still have to try to make progress, right? We still have to push it forward. We still have to do things like I just was this week. It was the 20th anniversary of Springboard, a really great organization that funds women entrepreneurs. It was founded by Kay Koplovitz, and they've, in their 20 years, their companies have created $20 billion worth of value and had 20 IPOs. So an incredible organization. But that organization is one of the organizations that progressively 20 years ago said women are not getting enough funding, and so let's create a forum where women are highlighted. So I would hope that someday we wouldn't have to be doing things like that because we would have flattened the playing field. But unfortunately, I think we still are facing some of those subtle things.
Sure. I agree. My next question. Tell me about Threshold Ventures. Tell me about the firm.
Well, I'm a partner at Threshold Ventures. They are an amazing, wonderful group of people. Threshold was, as I said, a spin out. The whole team of DFJ Ventures formed Threshold Ventures. And we still do manage the prior DFJ portfolios as well. So it was a spin out and a rebranding, but we're still responsible for the earlier funds as well. And it is co-founded by Josh Stein and Emily Melton, two great partners that came from that fund as well. They came up through the ranks there. We are focused on true Series A technology investing, typical check size, 5 million to 7, 8 million, something like that as the first check. Mm-hmm. We look across the consumer industry, we look across enterprise, which is we have a lot of solid grounding in that, and disruptive technologies as well. Mm-hmm. And based on Sand Hill and just a fantastic group of people. I really feel like it's one of those places that you walk into work every day and you're just glad you're there, and you're glad for the support of the other people there. Sure. We have a lot of fun together, we work really hard, and we have, I think, one of the greatest cohorts of entrepreneurs that anyone has ever assembled. So it makes it a joy to go to work each day.
What is your focus at the firm? What types of deals do you look
So
at?
I do a couple of things for the firm. I do sit on the investment committee and help make the investment decisions with respect to, the due diligence and the hearing the pitches and seeing what happens and helping the other partners with their deals as well. I manage a number of deals in what I would call the disruptive space. So I serve on 4 boards for Threshold at this time. Planet, which is the largest constellation ever launched of satellites, imaging the whole world every day, the whole world's landmass every day. Really remarkable company. Zoox, which is a fully autonomous vehicle as a service company. Again, remarkable company. And Memphis Meats, which is a cell-based meat company. So the idea that we can eat meat and not have to kill animals to do so. So really a remarkable company. So in each of those cases, I feel like, again, I have this opportunity to really help, change the world. I mean, I know those are words that people throw out all the time, but I really feel like these companies are trying to change the world in a very positive way. And then I recently joined the board of a company called Polar, which is in the image filter and editing space. So the idea that nowadays every image you see is made more beautiful or made more interesting or made more artistic to reflect the desires of the author of that image or the photographer of that image. And so it is very popular with young people. So it's a company I'm just coming up to speed with.
I see. So as investors, when we look at startups, there are 2 very important things that we look at. One is the size of the opportunity,
Right.
and 2 is the people that are creating this opportunity.
Absolutely.
I'd like to dive deeper on the people part. What are some very specific traits that you look at in an entrepreneur before you make an investment decision?
It is a great question. And, people always say, how do you know which things to pick? And I say, well, if I was perfect at that, well, first of all, I wouldn't tell everybody else. I would keep that as a trade secret. But I think that it is, especially when you're an early stage investor, it is so much a bet on the people. Because there are no metrics to analyze. There is a person with a big idea, and what you have to ask yourself is, first of all, is the idea big? Can you do the analysis? Can you figure out the total available market? Can you figure out whether, what is the technology? Is the technology viable? What is the competitive set? What are the barriers to entry? All of that stuff. You do your best on that. Yeah. But then it really is a bet on the person. I mean, when you're an early stage investor, you are typically going to have a span of about 5 to 7 years of relationship with that person. You're not in control. That person is in control, right? And a 5 to 7 year relationship is about the average relationship span of an American marriage that ends in divorce. And I would argue your VC is a lot harder to get rid of than your spouse. So you really have to think about that, right? You really have to think about, I'd say, from the entrepreneur perspective, what VC are you picking? And from the VC's perspective, can I trust this person for the next 5 to 7 years to do the right things and to really work their ass off, because this is really, really hard, and to attract the other kind of people who can make this happen, and to learn from mistakes, and to be a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, all of those things. And do I get along with this person? Do I feel that their ethics match mine? Do I think that they are going to be able to deal with the lumps and keep getting up? And that is not something you're ever going to determine by the PowerPoint, right? That is just, and it is not something, I tell this to entrepreneurs who seem to view venture capital as like going for a bank loan. Or I wrote a recent blog post where I say they view us as like the ogre on the bridge, and the pile of money is behind the ogre. And if you say the magic words and you unlock the ogre, you go get the pile of money and you run away and you never have to deal with the ogre again. But that is not really how it is. It is, we become your partner, and we try to help you build that company through to someday a liquidity event, because obviously that's what our limited partners expect from us, that someday we will sell those shares and give them a multiple of that money back. And so it really is a relationship. And in order to test whether you're picking the right partner for that relationship in both directions, I don't know how you do that without the passage of time and the opportunity to sit down together, work through hard issues, if an entrepreneur is pitching us and we say, well, what do you think of this or that? How did you come up with that number? They either have to know or they have to say, that's a good question, I'll get back to you. Right. Do they get back to us or not? Yeah. Is the pitch fraught with sort of aspirational things that aren't really true? Or, yes, every part of entrepreneurship is seeing a future that is bigger than the present and marching there. But that doesn't mean you have a license to lie about the present, right? And so those are all things that we are looking for. We're also looking for the dynamic among a founding team. When you bring in, and again, I've written a blog post about sort of things not to do in a pitch meeting. And it's amazing to me that you'll see, the founding team, you'll see them contradict each other. You'll see them talk over something. You'll see sometimes you'll see a CEO who takes credit for everything good that's happened in the company. You'll see disagreement in the pitch meeting about fundamental things. You'll see mistakes in numbers on the deck.
That and just reading the deck.
Yeah, yeah, and somebody just reads the deck. Yeah, I mean it is, and again, I feel that like that's one of those questions. Yeah. If someone is a terrible presenter, but they have a great idea, it's an interesting challenge because this may be the most brilliant idea in the world. But to a certain extent, if you're pitching yourself as the CEO, CEOs have to communicate and they have to lead and they have to motivate. And if you can't do that in a room of investors, that is a skill set. It is a skill set. It isn't that we don't like people who can't present. It's that we feel that is part of the skill set of being a CEO. So, it all boils down to a lot of human factor. And that is why I also think venture is a team sport. At least the way we play it at Threshold, it is a team sport. We rely on each other when we're, there's always a deal lead, but the rest of us are brought in to say, here are the kind of questions I would ask. Here's what I would go probe. Here are the references I think you should check. Here's what I'm willing to do to help you, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we live or die by the decisions we make as a team. It is not about each lone eagle off doing their own thing. It is about us making the best decisions using all of our experience as a team. And so that is why you have, people with different backgrounds. We have a lot of age diversity in our firm, actually. We have partners at 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So it is kind of interesting that we have a lot of age diversity. We have gender diversity. We have ethnic diversity. And we have experience diversity. We've done different sorts of things as individuals, which I think allows us to come together and not only make good decisions about what investments to make, but subsequent to that, when the rubber really meets the road, help those entrepreneurs, right? I mean, that is, if we don't help the entrepreneurs be successful, we don't earn the right to have more deal flow.
That's right.
And obviously, if we can help them, we create better outcomes. So that is where I think all the work, people think about venture a lot about the hunting part. And to me, the farming part is the part that is the most exciting and rewarding. Or are those 5 to 7 years you spend with each company trying to make it as successful as possible.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah. My next question. I'm excited to learn about this. You are globally considered a guru of networking. So much so that Harvard Business School has done a case study on you. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's a wild and it is an interesting. It's been a lesson for me in the power of a Harvard Business School case. I have to say, if you would have asked me 20 years ago when this case was written, what impact it would have on my life, I would have said, I don't know, writing a case that's taught in business schools for a couple of years, I don't think it'll have any impact. And yet it has been this amazing door opening device for me. And it has allowed me to meet such interesting people who will reach out to me because they resonate with the case. So the case came about 20 years ago. In short, it was probably a slow news day at USA Today, and they wrote an article about me being a Silicon Valley networker extraordinaire, because one of the journalists there, who's a lovely guy, would call me for information, and I will always connect him to the right person, and so he decided to write a story about me. And so this Harvard professor saw that article that day, and she was looking to write a case about building business networks, and she wanted a female protagonist. And so she called me and said, would you be willing to be our female protagonist for a case about building a network based on this article that we saw about you? And I said, well, I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about building. Yeah, I don't know Harvard level stuff about this. This is just like, I think it's common sense. And she said, oh, no. You'll be surprised. It's not common sense. So sat for that and went through the process of building the case, being interviewed. And then I read the rough draft and I said, I don't think this is that interesting. I'm pretty sure this is all like common sense, how you treat people and how you think about things. And again, she said, no, trust me, this is different. And so much to my surprise, the case came out and it was kind of, in the realm of business school cases, it's been quite a hit. It's had a 20-year run. It's still taught in all the top business schools, which I know because every once in a while I'll get like 100 LinkedIn requests from Wharton in the same week. And I'll be like, oh, it got taught in Wharton. It's taught at the Indian Business School. It's still taught at Harvard. It was until recently taught at Stanford. I'm kind of bummed that my own alma mater seems to have cycled it out. But it has become one of those sort of seminal business school cases. And I think the reason it strikes such a chord is most business school cases are, let us present you with data about a decision you have to make as an executive. And you make the decision. And then you move on. This case is about, let us talk about a way to be. Let's talk about how to be a person, how to be a human first in a business world, and what the pros and cons of that are. And so to me, there's a very fundamental thing here about being transaction driven versus being relationship driven. And I am very much a relationship driven person.
So can you talk a little bit about relationship versus transaction?
Yes, one of my favorite topics. I really do believe in life that we should, if we focus on relationships more than transactions, not only will we do better in business, but we'll be better people. And I really think that today more than ever, it is very hard to have a distinction between your business life and your personal life. I mean, today we are all judged and graded constantly, right? Your social media, you can be found on there, whatever you're saying on Twitter. My God, you can't even take an Uber without you're grading the Uber driver and they're grading you as a customer. Look at reviews on Etsy or Amazon or whatever. We're all sort of being judged all the time. And to me, that can be very scary. But it also can be a very empowering thing to think, what are my principles as a human being? And how can I live in this world in such a way that makes the other fellow travelers on this journey I'm on as a human being better off as a result of having worked with me? And of course, there are boundaries to that, and you have to do it within reason, and there are certain times you can't find the win-win in every situation. But I believe if you go into everything thinking relationship first, transaction second, that you will actually do better in work. Because, and certainly I've learned it in my 61 years of being on this planet, your reputation is what's the most important to you. And you will run into people over and over and over again. The same people that you dealt with 10 years ago will come back in and again, because of the way our current society works and because of the way technology works, your reputation is imprinted in a way that people can, I can find out about anybody in 10 minutes time by looking at Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and and whatever sources I might want to find. And so I think that thinking about it that way, thinking about this mindset of I am all about the win-win and I'm all about trying to help other people when I can, just sets you up for success and sets you up to sleep better at night. I mean, not to go all woo-woo on you, but there is, when I went through a divorce about 10 years ago, and I read a bunch of books about happiness, as one does when one's going through divorce, I guess. And one of the books I read was The Happiness Hypothesis, which talked about happiness over millennia and over different cultures. And it really boiled down to happiness is about meaningful work and meaningful relationships. And I think one of the interesting things about Silicon Valley, and certainly as being an entrepreneur or being a venture capitalist, is that meaningful work and meaningful relationships happen at the same time and happen in the same place. Some of the people with whom I have the closest friendships are also people that I have gone through significant work experience with. And so to me, this makes so much sense to me that it just makes your life better And so why wouldn't you want to do something
Yeah.
that makes your life better?
Yeah. It completely resonates with me. I couldn't agree more with you on this. Yeah, absolutely. So then, with that being said, do you have any tips or advice to entrepreneurs out there on building a meaningful business network?
Yes, I mean, I think that for a lot of people, when you say networking, and I kind of don't like the word networking because networking implies to me sort of like you're monkey barring your way across people to get to the person you want to get to, where I really think of it as building a resource of a relationship with fellow travelers. It's not about volume. It's not about how many people you have in your network. It is about, I think, in a way, consistency and quality of your interactions with people. And so I do think about the idea of, there were years ago that there was sort of this jokey thing about everybody talking about personal brand, like what's your personal brand? It was kind of bullshit. But when you think about what is a brand is a promise of consistency, right? When you go to Starbucks in Scotland or when you go to Starbucks in wherever you are, you expect a certain style, a certain kind of music, a certain, there's certain things on the menu. Even the baristas are kind of, you have an expectation. And when that expectation is met, it reinforces that brand, right? And so to me, I think that we each have what is a consistent thing about me that people can come to expect that makes it easier to deal with me because they know I'm always going to be a certain way. I'm not going to be super responsive one day and non-responsive the next day. I'm not going to be pragmatic one day and off the handle another day. I mean, I look at this and I say, if I can present this consistent, helpful behavior, that makes it easier to interface with me, right? And so that is, I think, one of the things is each person can think about, how do I become that? How do I become efficient in my communications? How do I, and again, these are choices everyone has to make, but for me, part of it is, how do I inject humor and humanity into everything I do? Because life is more fun that way, and it makes me, I think, a person that more people would like to have around the table, right? Because I'm, at the end of the day, the entrepreneurs choose us, right? They usually, all the good ones, they have multiple term sheets, and they're going to choose us based on whether or not they want to work with us. We have to earn that right. And part of it is who we are and how are we going to behave in these circumstances. And I want to know that when an entrepreneur calls up other entrepreneurs and says, what was Heidi like? That not only are the ones who won going to say that I was a good person and was helpful, but even the ones who didn't win are going to say that. That's what I think really, really separates them.
So Heidi, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh,
it has
my
been
pleasure.
Great to have you, and I hope I get to see you again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we're neighbors.
Yeah,
so
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
No, this was really a lot of fun, and I hope there was something useful in all that.
Absolutely,
for your
absolutely.
audience.
You're a wealth of knowledge and an abundance of knowledge. Thank you.
you.
Thank you. Folks, thanks for joining us. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.